Recording starting.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another lockdown lecture with Harif. If you're new to Harif, Harif is spelled H-A-R-I-F, and we are the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. And we've been doing over 50 of these lockdown lectures since the health crisis began. Most of them are actually recorded, so you can catch up if you go to our website, www.harif.org. We have a video channel. And this evening's lecture will be recorded as well. So Harif is actually a group of volunteers, a very small group of volunteers, and we aim to raise awareness of the history and culture of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. I do urge you to subscribe to our mailing list if you're not already there. And of course, you don't need to be Sephardi, just interested in Sephardim and Mizrahim. We do have a sister website which keeps you up to date with the news, and that's called Point of No Return. And the website address there is www.jewishrefugees, all in one word, .org.uk. As I mentioned, we are recording this presentation, and it'll be up in a day or so. Because there are so many of you, I would urge you to write any questions or comments in the chat at the bottom of your screen, and I'm sure our presenter will be very happy to answer questions. In June, Nigel Grizzard gave us a presentation about the Sephardim of Yorkshire. But of course, the largest and most important community was in Lancashire, in Manchester. And Sephardi Jews were amongst the earliest Jews to settle in that city. We are very fortunate to have with us Rabbi Ariel Abel, who was in fact brought up in a Sephardi synagogue community in the north of Manchester. And he will be giving us a historical overview of the history of the Sephardim of Manchester. He will tell us who were the leading influences, and he will also talk about the present state of the community and what the future, what sort of future may lie ahead of it. Rabbi Abel was, as I said, raised in North Manchester, and he qualified as a rabbi at the Sephardi Sheheba Center in the Old City of Jerusalem. And under the guidance and support of Rabbi Dr. Abraham Levy of the Spanish and Portuguese congregation, and former Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs, Rabbi Ariel revived and directed the Montefiore Rabbinic Ordination Program in London, which has been dormant for many years. He's had 25 years experience as a communal rabbi, but his career has taken a slightly new direction. He's trained to be a solicitor, and he is hoping to be admitted shortly to the roll of solicitors of England and Wales. He lives with his wife and their two youngest children in central Liverpool. So without more ado, over to you, Rabbi Ariel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Lynn. Just from the outset, although you read out perfectly accurately what I sent to you, as a slight qualification for me to make on the point that when I started out, I intended to be able to give you a picture of the leading influences, certainly from amongst the Sephardim in Manchester. It's gone on a slight tangent from that, so that that of it is a work in progress. What, however, I will be able to do is to share with everybody tonight a potted history of how it all began and started out, and why the Sephardim came to Manchester, particularly the ones from the Near East, and in particular, in order to focus my study more precisely, I stuck to an area that I already knew a little bit about, and that is, particularly in South Manchester area, the Syrian community, the elders know. The reason for that is that I have been bugged 10 years as to what happened around the story of someone we will examine a little bit in detail, the Nissim Teubal. The Teubal brothers became very well known, famous, and pioneering in the Syrian Jewish community in Buenos Aires, and I got to the bottom of it as a result of the research that Lynn gave me great encouragement to do. And taking this tangent has helped me understand much better what in fact drove various developments, not only with the Syrian community but others, but particularly them and their interaction with the Spanish and Portuguese communities. We'll have also a cursory look at two rabbis who stand out from the crowd, who many of you will know about and will have known, certainly one of them personally in your lifetime. So what I will start out by saying is, thank you for being with me this evening. And I'll now give out my email address, because any and every bit of information will be very valuable to me for your feedback, from your feedback. And my intention is to continue with all of this until we can get to the point that we have a local history unit set up to actively pursue as a live group the local Sephardi history in Manchester, and regionally also in Southport, and to some extent in Liverpool, although there isn't much. The first slide you will see, which is screen shared, has 7 sources that I used. The book by Lydia Collins, which I would have relied upon to give a very full analysis, it is so unavailable for me to get hold of. Even Sharei Hayim Synagogue does not have its reference copy available. So I searched high and low, but not this time. However, I found some very important other sources, including a book I'm holding in my hands, and I don't know, well, it was screen sharing, so we'll leave it that way. Manchester Jewry in Manchester and Manchester in the 30s by Monty Dobkin, which has a snippet of information which is useful. The first slide, therefore, you're all very welcome to ask me by email to rabbiable@gmail.com for your private use or research, and I'd be very happy to send it to you, because it will contain links that will lead you to the sources for further study or reading, if you so wish. So there we are. If with thanks posthumously to the magnificent Bill Williams for his books and the authors of the other articles which I have referred to.
Do you want me to open the articles up, Rabbi Abel?
Say that again?
Do you want me to open the articles up? The click?
No, well, at one point it will be necessary to make reference, if we can. Actually, no, it won't be necessary, because I'll be able to read from the Hebrew, translating simultaneously parts of a letter which is referred to in Yaron Harel's The First Jews from Aleppo in Manchester. So I don't think it'll be necessary, but thanks. If I need it, I'll ask you. Second slide. Oh, well, we just have an introductory picture here from one of the famous South Manchester synagogues, of course, that you will recognize in Disbury. Early hubs for Jews from the Near East. Syrian Jews used to gather around, but in different places, including the old Jews school in Manchester. However, as we will see in a moment, it was really Spanish Portuguese that gave them the synagogal roof as it were, their heads. There's a couple of reasons for that, which we will make from when. So if we move on to the next slide now, please. Yeah, are you okay to? Yeah. So by the 1860s, Aleppo Jews had controlled half of the trade between the Ottoman Empire and England. This was partly due to a very successful petition that was made to a British consul in Alexandria, where the Alexandretta, as it was known, jetty, was set up as a result. The British consul was called Skene, and they petitioned him successfully to do this and to transport via Egypt and control a lot of import and export between England and the Near East. Now, we have a number of names which are mentioned in a letter, which was unearthed by Yaron Harel, a researcher. You can see the names in there, many of which are known to you, and some of whom their family members ended up in Manchester by design, because Syrian Jews found themselves in a situation as the Industrial Revolution took hold and put England in a prime position in producing cotton, cloth, amongst other things. That was the main product that threatened to make whatever was produced elsewhere a backward product that they couldn't push. And so cheaper and higher quality cotton from English factories, especially in the north, Lancashire, Manchester being very much a central place for that, required Syrian Jewish families, especially from Aleppo, but not only, to send their sons to branch out to prime locations such as Manchester, but not only, and other port cities where they could keep trading between them. This pattern of port trading, of course, is an old method of keeping going ever since the and before, but especially since the Inquisition of Portuguese Jews and the influx of Spanish and Portuguese or Portuguese Jewish families into Syria accounts for why we, in spite of the fact of them being in the Near East or Middle East, refer to them nonetheless as Sephardim, because there were two groups, of course, in Aleppo, groups of families, one being Sephardim, those who had come via Turkey or other places, from Spain and Portugal after the 15th, from the 16th century onwards, and of course the Mustarbin, those who were already there from before as resident Jews in Arab countries. So, as this slide will mention, halfway down, Batis, or possibly this is the same surname as Batesh. Abraham Batis was supposed to have come, Batish, to Manchester by 1843. And then another gentleman is registered to have lived in Manchester, known as Moshe Assis, also from Aleppo. But it's not in the census. The first two families only appear in 1861. And Syrian Jews are said to have only wanted to come temporarily, of course, because the homeland is the homeland and you go back there eventually, and therefore only temporarily settle in Manchester to improve trade. But of course, doubtless these things inevitably became facts on the ground, and families stayed and settled as they experienced success. The Industrial Revolution, therefore, is the reason that sparked Manchester as a destination, as we have explained. What we will now do is move on to mention again, work in progress of what I would like to look. So the next slide, if you will. When a son of a Jewish trader was born in Aleppo, the words, "May he live in Manchester," would be added to the traditional blessings given after a Brit circumcision. So I would like to find, perhaps, who knows, there may be printed edition containing a Harachaman or some prayer, which actually we may still be able to get hold of to evidence this. But I think it's only really in secondary and tertiary sources at the moment. Let's have a look at the next slide. Another very important theme, and certainly as a rabbi I'm deeply interested in, is the proxy bride situation. So you send, you appoint another Jew to travel to, let's say, to Aleppo, and according to Jewish law, curiously, you are able to wed a bride who you may have never met before either, or never even heard of. And what happens is that it happens, and you're not even conscious of it, as it was in those days, because on arrival, the Jew that you had turned to in Manchester and said, look, would you do me a favor, please? Or even if you sent a letter to a rabbi for this to happen locally, could you do me a favor? Could you go and wed a woman for me and bring her back? If you may have had notice of her name, perhaps from her family, but that's just about it. And at that point, this woman in Aleppo would then be wedded to this gentleman in Manchester and then would be sent over. So the boys used to leave, but what the Syrian community was on about is that they absolutely didn't want them to either intermarry. Well, intermarry means anyone outside of the Syrian community. They would consider that to be, avoidable. If it was avoidable, then they must do it, let alone anyone outside of the faith. And we will see from the letter that was drawn up to try and obtain the services of a permanent rabbi from Aleppo for the families that had settled in Manchester, just how sensitive they were to their religious needs and how they did not feel or find that they could be adequately satisfied by the local Jewish community, no matter how religious they were. They were nonetheless Ashkenazi, and that would never be good enough. Next slide. Here's a puzzling account, therefore, of Yeshayahu Atiyah.
Sorry, give me a second to get back there. Sorry about this. Right, we're back. Yep.
Yeah, Yeshayahu Atiyah. And what I'm going to do is I've actually got this everything screenshot saved for this, so you won't have the following text. It's in Hebrew. I'd be very happy to share it with whoever would like it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a free translation of certain parts of it to give you a flavor of. Oh goodness me! This actually wasn't. Oh yes, it's okay now. This was a letter that was found by Yaron Harel. I'm still at a loss, having read through this very carefully, as to what date it was. He says that this letter is very helpful for the dating of when Manchester's Jews first settled. That's where he leaves it. But I couldn't find the date anywhere for it. Seems to be from the from the latter half of the 19th century. It doesn't say exactly when, whereabouts. The way to be able to trace it would best be by doing a separate search for the individuals who signed it, ostensibly in Manchester and in Hebrew. It was written originally in Sephardic script, which is a particular type of script, which the Ashkenazim can't read, by the way, and containing the names such as Daniel and Eliezer Silvera, Yaakov and Nissim Teubal, Hillel Moshe Sasson, and also from the Betesh family and the Laniado family. So they got together in Manchester and sent a letter out to Yeshayahu Atiyah, or rather, this letter is a response to their request from a rabbi assigned from a rabbinic family, Yeshayahu Atiyah. Now, those amongst you who are well versed in the rabbis of Aleppo will know that in the 1770s approximately, there was a very prominent rabbi called Yeshayahu Atiyah, who is the author of the well-known responsa, rabbinical responsa, Bigdei Yesha. This seems to be a grandson of his that was asked to come out to be the permanent rabbi in Manchester. And these are the reasons which are given why. The request was made because from those honorable gentlemen that had originally come from Eretz, which is the acronym for Aran Soba, Aleppo, to come out to Manchester. It's very interesting to see how they spelled it. And the reason being that it would be necessary for them to have a rabbi who would look after them. And one of the first things that's mentioned is shechita, their food, their meat. And they felt that they were not necessarily receiving, even kosher meat wasn't kosher enough for them. They wasn't being done to their standards, which is one thing they were very concerned about. And therefore, since they'd gone to live there, now they were seeking a takana, some sort of corrective solution. What better corrective solution than to employ a rabbi to come out, not only look after kashrut, but also to write tefillin and mezuzot. And it's actually mentioned that they did not consider Ashkenazi tefillin to be kosher for them to wear. The script was not right, and it was just not good enough. And indeed, not with regards to the meat, it wasn't just a question of slaughter, but it was also nikur, which is the porging of the hindquarters, which they required done, and so on. And of course, bakery and cooking, and they were not too happy with having to rely on things that were cooked by non-Jews either, and so on. So all of these things had to be taken care of. They also wanted a shliach tzibur, an officiant. This rabbi had to be playing all the instruments at once. They wanted him for Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, and to be able to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and also to correct any Sefer Torah, to upkeep it, and to make sure that the Sefer Torah was kosher once a week. He'd have to actually check the Sefer Torah once a week. In other words, before reading the parasha, he will have had to have gone through it, and if anything was amiss, he'd have to correct it. Very interesting to see this, because this also has a great reflection on religious communal history and how congregations were expected to be managed, at least in the Near East. And also to learn Torah with the members of the community. And it sounds like a very, very full job description for rabbi, fuller than anything you'll see in the United Synagogue nowadays, although they needed it because they also not only wanted to do their religious things, but also keep up their traditions. That's what they were looking forward to do. ובעבור כל זה הענן דהטמינן למטה חייבנו עצמנו לחכם ישעיה ישמר אצלו ויחייהו. So in the original letter, obviously was a rendition and copied into the response, they said that they were prepared to come to an agreement with him, and then it talks into how much they were going to pay him and how much they were going to pay for a Sefer Torah and so on and so forth, to bring with him. So it actually says here clearly that they abide by the ruling of the Hida, Chaim Yosef David Azulai, the famous rabbi and Kabbalist, who ruled, as it is written here in this letter, Shektivat Ashkenazim Pesulim Hem LaSfaradim, that the script employed and used in holy parchments, Sefer Torah, Mezuzah, and Tefillin, are pasul. They are completely and utterly useless. They are not kosher, and they're not to be relied upon. So there we are. That's quite a strong statement of what and why they needed it. So this letter was unearthed by Harif, and of course, if anybody afterwards can give me some better idea of when approximately this could have been, I'd be very grateful. If not, I will find out. And hopefully by tracing exactly when these gentlemen in here from these families who committed themselves to engage Yeshayahu Atiyah actually wrote what they did. Now, what this letter also doesn't say anything about, this article by Harel does not talk about at all, is whether in fact he turned up. As far as I know, and again, other than I think a Rabbi Ades at some point, there was no Chacham that came from Syria that was able to permanently stay with them, stay with the Syrian community galvanize them, build them into a synagogue, and grow them into a self-sustaining community. And therefore, what did not happen in Manchester is what did happen in Buenos Aires, in New York, Mexico City, in Geneva for that matter even, where in all of these cities and many more besides, in Brazil, Sao Paulo, for instance, where, and indeed even to this day in Bogota, in Colombia, where the Syrian, Aleppo Jews, Damascenes as well, when they joined in with them, formed communities that were fully developing of educational facilities, which enabled the boys and the girls of the congregations concerned to continue to bring over to the new country all of their traditions, which of course singularly has to include not just the culinary and other such and the basic tefillot, but the tremendous musical traditions of the Syrian Jewish community in the form of their piyutim, which is very much the pride of the Syrian Jewish community in the New World, especially to this day. So this seems not to have come about. If anyone comes forward and says, no, Yeshayahu Atiyah did arrive, but someone else didn't, please let me know. Because from what I understood from Rabbi Dr. Abram Levy, who was discussing the Syrian Jewish community with me in Manchester a long time ago, he said, well, they never managed to get themselves a Chacham. And we don't know what happened because the rabbi the Chacham that they were trying to engage never turned up. And that's where it all runs dry, if you like, the trail goes cold. However, about 10 or 12 years ago, Rabbi Levy in London, by Dr. Abram Levy, came across and published in the Sephardi Bulletin of Lauderdale Road, which I must have a copy of somewhere, but I remember this vividly, an account of a Victorian lady. It was actually a diary kept by a Victorian lady who was traveling from the Near East back to England, and she tells of a Jewish Arab dressed as such rabbi who was on board with her and saying that he was on his way to Manchester. This gentleman who was on board at the time of the ship said to her, became quite friendly, and they were chatting and rather conversational, and he told her that he'd been asked to come over to be the rabbi of the community. However, the sad thing is that he had not brought enough kosher food with him and refused to eat anything else. He fell ill. There was a storm. He went up to get air on deck. A wave carried him overboard, and he was never heard of again. And this is the last piece that I need to try to figure out is, first of all, was Yeshayahu Atiyah that rabbi? Did he ever arrive in Manchester? If he didn't, was he that rabbi who fell overboard? Because apparently, after this great effort that was made to get a Chacham, those in Manchester who were waiting for him gave up afterwards and never tried again, thinking that perhaps their compatriots over in Syria weren't really too interested to send one. So that's quite a tragic ending, if it was that caused the Chacham that they wanted to never turn up. But this is yet to be the final bits of it of the story have yet to be hopefully verified. So I'll also make mention of another Rabbi Shabtai Beda, who would have settled in Manchester but ended up staying in Buenos Aires. People did move quite a bit between Manchester and Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is a community I know quite well. I lived there, and I got to know the Syrian Jewish community there very well indeed. In fact, I have 4 children who actually are part of the very community that I will discuss in a moment, that was helped to be, was actually co-founded by a Syrian Jew who figures rather importantly in Manchester. So that's coming up soon. Rabbi Shabtai Beda was pre-First World War, and he intended on he went out to Buenos Aires with the intention of returning to Manchester, but was unable to because the First World War broke out. And that meant that he stayed where he was. Had he come back, who knows what could have happened in Manchester as a result. He was a trader, but nonetheless, he was also a fully qualified rabbi. Let's go to the next slide, please, if we may. So here we have, of course, what is so familiar to us and beloved to us, Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, as it was until the last service, I think, was in 19... I'll be enlightened, but I remember the very last, when the very last service was to take place. Built in 1874, same year that Princess Road Synagogue, where I was the rabbi, and over the last 20 years for 11 of them, which is also built in the Moorish design, much more gaudily than this synagogue is reminiscent of at all. The Spanish and Portuguese synagogue here was founded in Cheetham Hill Road, 6th of May 1874. And it was unto this synagogue that previous small hubs of Syrian Jews meeting different places decided to gather and make their permanent home. If we move to the next slide, please. So who is this gentleman? Let me just go on to the next. Right, okay. Well, in the little script, I've given you a few heavy hints. Sorry, if you want to go back. That's
Sorry.
okay. That's okay. I've given you a few heavy hints. His grandfather was the first presidente of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in Cheetham Hill Road. He himself, the gentleman in the picture, was a Liberal MP. He eventually moved to the Tories in Plymouth, Devonport, and he was the MP that succeeded him was Michael Foot. Here he's seen visiting the French front 1939 when he was the Secretary of State for War. So this is Leslie Hor-Belisha, also known for the Belisha beacons, which were instituted in his time with his watchful eye. His grandfather, Belisha, Isaac David, was the first president of the synagogue on Cheetham Hill Road, the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. Along with him, there was another founder member, which I think I will come to at some point soon. Of the Hachamim, the rabbinical leaders, I would like to make mention of, in the next slide, if we move to it, please. The Rabbi Henry or Haim Pereira Mendes, later called to the pulpit of Sherit Israel, which I visited for the first time only 3 years ago. He was the first rabbi of Sha'arei Tefillah, which I've spelled carefully with the NG to represent the Ain of the Spanish and Portuguese. So he was there for 3 years, but I think 3 very not only founding but eventful, impacting years. And I've just mentioned here just one work that he wrote, which I have yet to read. I've just taken a glance at, which is almost prophetic in its attempt, called "Looking Ahead: The 20th Century Happenings," and he published that in 1899. And I have the link to the online copy of it. He was born in 1852 in Birmingham and died in New York in 1937. Now, in those days, certainly in the Ashkenazi community, it was notoriously difficult to get hold of a minister rabbi who had been born in this country and trained in this country. Of course, amongst the Sephardim, they were fortunate to have some because they'd been here for that much longer. And so in Princess Road Synagogue, which are actually Ashkenazi synagogue founded the same year as I've mentioned, they had to look long and hard to find a minister who was British born and who would be capable of giving a sermon in English rather than Yiddish. So whilst the Ashkenazi community was still struggling with assimilation to the degree of being able to do these things, what we nowadays take for granted, the Sephardim were, of course, well ahead of the game. If we go to the next screen, we have Rabbi Dr. Morris Gagin, who was born to an unbroken line of rabbis stretching back 7 centuries. so chronologied. And although this was not the only famous rabbi in his family, there were many famous direct ancestors as well. Of course, he was the son of Rabbi Shem Tov Gagin, and Rabbi Shem Tov Gagin is the author of the definitive encyclopedia of Sephardim Minhagim, of the Spanish and Portuguese communities across from Jerusalem through to Amsterdam, London, and also Turkey. Sorry. Okay, and was of course a very, very literary, brilliant man, but of course it served as well as the Dayan of the in Jerusalem Bet Din, and so did his ancestors, who are also, one of whom is of course features prominently in the famous Farhi saga, where for over a period of 5 generations there was a great feud within the Farhi family over a huge fortune that went to Bet Din about, many Batei Din in many cities about, and that I had the privilege in 1998-9 to actually translate into English for the first time for Joe Dweck of South Manchester, whom you all, I'm sure, know. So Rabbi Dr. Maurice Gagin, again, this is going to be something of a new journey for me to learn a lot more about his life, which I'm sure many of you will be able to help me with. Some of his distinctions, roles, let's say, he was a military chaplain, and straight away feeling affinity, was a free Menorah Lodge worshipful master, 1968-9, and he got first class honours from Manchester University. So did I. 1965, presented a thesis in Ethiopic studies. Not quite, but Ethiopic has definitely been a very great venture of mine, and in only a week's time I shall be at an Eritrean wedding singing in Ethiopic, so wish me luck with that. But these definitely are 2 very prominent names. There will be others. There was a which I will perhaps focus on a future occasion if I have the opportunity to do so. Now, the Café Royal. There was a Moshe Yosef Bianco, who was one of the co-founders of the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, Cheetham Hill Road. He was a Syrian trader, and along with Isaac David Belisha, he accompanied him. He's a rather colourful character. He established a Café Royal on Peter Street, where his family continued to live for years later. Into the First World War era, there was a gunner also from the family, Bianco, I believe, and they lived on Peter Street as well. So I think the family also lived there. We have the addresses. This was, of course, the Café Royal was named after Theatre Royal, and they're gathered there as one of the gathering places of the Arabs, as sometimes they were called, which were basically the Jews from Arab lands, predominantly from Aleppo, also from Turkey, known in Spanish, of course, as the Turcos, the Turks, who would assemble there to play games, but more importantly, to do trade and so on. There were other such places. I don't know what on earth it says Carmona for. It was Cardoma, the Cardoma Cafe, coffee houses. There were, of course, it was like what Starbucks is nowadays, only better, I'm sure. And there were 3 branches in the centre of Manchester, St Anne's, Market Street, and the other one, I think, in the Royal Exchange area. It's all gone now, but I understand from Basil Judah, and I'm sure he'll come on later to tell me more about it. He has already mentioned to me there was one just off Princess Avenue, and it was there that the Ladino-speaking Jews continued to meet until about the 1950s. So there were various different places where Jews from the Near East would gather together, and I'm indebted to Reuben Jacob in South Manchester, known to some as Roy Jacob, in whose home I dwelt for about 7 hours reading through material to prepare me partly for this. And he told me about Black's Deli, which was of course Ashkenazi, but how the Judeo-Arabs from the Near East would be congregating there to buy their Ashkenazi food, which they also enjoyed very much. Indeed. Next to the Odeon, I'm just trying to think, probably I think in the area of Great Cheatham Street East, what it is now. And there was a Turkish restaurant of St. Peter's Square in town that he mentioned as well. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, please, one after that. So leaving Aleppo. Now we come on to the specific case study that I did of the Teubal brothers. Now I've heard, and I don't remember who told me about this, but there are professors Teubal who may even still be very much with us and alive in Manchester today, who may be from the same family, who are professors who have lectured in textiles but don't trade in them anymore. However, going back to the beginning of the 20th century, through to the middle of it, we have the story of Nissim Teubal, which is told in his book El Inmigrante de Aleppo a Buenos Aires, 1953, 1953. And this is just an excerpt from there. We were humiliated by a practically despotic and literally crushing regime. He's speaking of what it was like to be in the Ottoman Empire in Aleppo. Everything made me want to leave Aleppo. Life there did not have a future. There was not even a business that had more than 20 workers. What would we wait for? Loss, poverty, mediocrity. The Jews were excluded from political administrative life of the country. Without capital, financial resources, support, at best, they could only aspire to be a day laborer, have a vegetable stand, a shop, or a small stand. And this, of course, paints a really awful picture, does it not? Much later, 1935, he eventually visits Aleppo again and celebrates the great smells that he missed so much over the years, and found the romantic again in his birth city of Aleppo. However, of course, it is true to say that he would not have made his fortunes there. And he did not. He made them in Buenos Aires and lived for the most part in the community there, but for one very important element that he could only get done in Manchester. Let's go on to the next slide. Nissim Teubal. And I found this account in Spanish on a descendant of his blogspot, which he wrote about his great-grandfather. His name is Jonathan Michael Teubal. And he writes about his ancestor having been on an 18-year visit to Manchester from Buenos Aires to strengthen business ties. Whilst there in 1923, he married Violet Mansour, and they had 3 children. They were all born there and came over with English names. So, to wind back, Nissim was born in 1906, and at the age of 13, they moved to Buenos Aires. However, as he grew into adult into his 20s, he found that this was not going to be enough for him, so he moved to Manchester for this period of time. What did he do there? Why did he go? Let's go on to the next slide. Yes, he married there, but what was his main driving force? So this tells his story. So I beg your pardon, in 1906, at 13 years old, Nissim Teubal left Aleppo for Argentina, and after living in Buenos Aires for 6 years, he moved to Manchester, England for 18 years to further develop his trading business. Nissim, who returned to Buenos Aires with his family in 1930, was a public figure among the Sephardim in Buenos Aires, in addition to running his own trading company. Okay, so far so good. Next slide, please. And this is just an excerpt from Jonathan Michael's blogspot, where it mentions, and I put it in bold, that his older brother Ezra taught his younger brother Nissim in his first years in Buenos Aires how to be a vendedor ambulante, which simply means a peddler. Now, when I was in Buenos Aires, people who remembered others who did this, going back far enough, told me that, of course, Buenos Aires is built like New York, only even more structurally grid-like. And what would happen is that the early Sephardi or Aleppine, some of them were Mustarbin as well, families would buy their goods cheaply at the port or whatever, and then they would walk for miles and miles and miles all day, right through an entire day, along these very straight streets. And each time they would take another direction, pathway, and sell. And they would sell all manner of different things. And this was what Nissim Teubal was first introduced to. However, he wanted to better himself further and put himself in a position of power. Remember that he refers to the whole idea of wanting to leave behind mediocrity. Well, how would you best do that if you lived in Argentina in the early 20th century, who were very much the commercial leaders and hosts of the powerhouses of lending of capital? Of course, it was the British. And to this day, there are 200,000 or so British Argentines, as they are known, living there. And therefore, he decided to take his feet to Manchester. Let's move on to the next slide, please. They first set up the firm Ezra Teubal and Brothers, which included Nissim, but he didn't want to be in their shadow at all. And so if you move to the next slide, he went to Manchester, and the reason for doing this is that he wanted to improve his connections and get some sort of power base that he could come back with, the sort of connections that will allow him to move freely and recommended in circles back in Buenos Aires that previously he had no access to. And so he did this successfully, having spent his time in England, in Manchester, and he came back. And he ended up founding B'nai B'rith in Buenos Aires and Argentina as a whole, Maccabi, the sports club, which to this day, both of them are very powerful and functioning, but mainly filled with Ashkenazi Jews. If we now go to the next slide, we will see some other influences. The British Patriotic Fund. He became the treasurer of the British Patriotic Fund. Now, you cannot underestimate what that means. Anyone who's been to Buenos Aires will know, if you walk up and down the very, very large port area, the entire port was built with British funds that were lent to Argentina to do this. And for that matter, the money was spent back on materials that you can still see where they came from. They came from Liverpool, they came from Birmingham, and they're still stamped as such. In fact, the port city of Buenos Aires is almost identical to the Liverpool port docks. And so to be the treasurer of the British Patriotic Fund would make you, perhaps give you the greatest financial leverage that any other Jew could possibly have in Argentina at the time. He also became a founder of the Rotary Club in Argentina. So he was a great man of faith, it says here, hombre de fe y filántropo, and a great philanthropist. So that is what he did. But that's not all. Let's go on to the next slide. As if that wasn't enough, Nissim Teubal did other things too. He had other influences on life back in Buenos Aires. We go on to the next. Yeah. Yesod Hadat. This is the synagogue that my children all attend and are part of. The Yesod Hadat synagogue was co-founded by Nissim Teubal. Now, the reason why I came to this in the very first place is the fact that a number of tunes are completely out of character for this synagogue. So they have a very strong Near East, Syrian Turkish set of piyutim. Every Shabbat morning, right throughout the winter, they meet for at least 3 or sometimes even 3.5 hours before the service, Shabbat morning service begins, and they sing their way through thick poetry books according to the maqamat, the musical arrangements and scales of the Arabic tradition. So how does it come to be that there are certain points in the service where everything turns Spanish and Portuguese? Let's see. Next slide, please. Well, there's 2 spaces to fill in because I've got to find the comparative recordings for them. However, for the third one that you see there, Hashgibenu, like the others, they are in Ajam. Ajam is the major scale, the only major scale, Maqam. And we're just about to compare 2 recordings. One from London, which equally Manchester, and one from Buenos Aires. And let's hear how they sound. Thank you. And now Buenos Aires, sung by the children's choir in the synagogue Yesod Hadat. Okay, so quite apart from the Buenos Aires tango swing that's influenced this, you can hear it's clearly a synagogue that had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the Spanish and Portuguese, clearly using a derivative from that. And the choir master of the Yesod Hadat synagogue told me clearly that it was the brothers Teubal who brought this as Hazanim. They actually also, in addition to everything else they did, acted as officiants because they had picked up the Hazanut from Cheetham Hill in Manchester and brought it over to Buenos Aires. So there we are. Let's see. Who drew the excellent portrait of Nissim Teubal? I'm not entirely sure, but I think we'll have to ask Jonathan Michael, his descendant, because it's on his blog spot. We'll have to find out who did this. Very quick Couple of slides are on North Manchester. You see in this picture Emmanuel Raffles' house, which is now demolished. That doorway, for me, growing up as a child, was everything. This is where I came to be with my fellow Jews, to pray, to sing, to study, what really became my life, which was my Sephardi tradition. And this is Emmanuel Raffles' house. 2 rooms were rented here for decades on end. I think the first minyan in Manchester was Rabbi Yokubi's minyan. I need to find out more about that, with the first North African presence in town. And then the Nefutzot Yehuda, which met here. A lot of you will have heard of Nefutzot Yehuda, the resplendent congregation in Gibraltar. I don't know whether this had the same reason it was named the same way, but the 2 rooms at this home were presided over unofficially by Rabbi Saadia Amor, who later became the successor to Dayan P. Toledano, when Pinchas Toledano retired from being the Dayan of the Bet Din, Sephardi Bet Din in Lordsdale Road in London. For a very short period of time, they somewhat succeeded to try and set up a Sephardi center there, Rabbi Yashar Levi, but that unfortunately did not get the promised financial support that was required, and therefore, unfortunately, everything had to be abandoned. So even before the building was demolished, they had to translocate to the Sephardi Yeshiva, which had been operating for a number of years in another part of the neighborhood, which was presided over by Rabbi Israel Malul, who's a rather curious character because he's a perfect combination of Spanish, Sephardi, Morocco, and Satmar Hasidism. And still, one still wonders, but that is who led a Sephardi yeshiva, which was mainly populated by students who were brought over from Morocco. The main population of this 60 family, at the very, very most, at its height, congregation came over. They were boys who were brought over to study in Ashkenazi yeshivot in Sunderland first, and later Sunderland yeshiva moved to Gateshead and made their home in Manchester, married for the most part Ashkenazi wives, and wanted to keep their tradition going. And they did so very well, I have to say. One of my greatest mentor from that congregation was Rabbi Shlomo Dahan, who, like a number of others, officiated as a shohet in the community, and he taught me Kriyat HaTorah and Haftarah and a lot of other things besides. So the next slide we find here, we'll just have a little bit of detail on what we've just mentioned. Israel Malul, the Sephardic Yeshiva, and what I call hybrid Hasidic identity, which eventually becomes entirely Hasidic. We're seeing generally the community going from being suit wearing and hat wearing to very much black hat and black suit, very much Ashkenazification. There is a lot of what is known perhaps pejoratively, so pardon me, I'm not being pejorative, but is known as Ashkenormativity. The Sephardi identity was greatly boosted in Manchester by several visits by Hacham Ovadia Yosef, who came from Israel and really bumped up the self-image of Sephardim there. But for the most part, this has been very difficult to sustain. A synagogue known as Bet Yitzhak became the successor to Nefutzot Yehuda at the former yeshiva building of the Sephardi Yeshiva. I think it's at New Hall Road. Rabbi Shmuel Shokron, who was a lecturer at the yeshiva when the yeshiva shut down some years ago, set up his own minyan and catering for Sephardim who came from various different parts. He's actually Spanish from Malaga, and it's the only synagogue that I've been to, certainly in Manchester, where shiurim or in the afternoon certainly are given in Hebrew as a matter of course. And I'm talking not about Israeli Hebrew, I'm talking about Sephardic Hebrew without it having come from Israel. So this is the old Sephardic tradition that you speak Hebrew on Shabbat is maintained in that synagogue. if we move on to the next slide, we're coming very much to the end now. Yes, there is mention of Rabbi Ades. I do not know enough at all about him to speak about him. I know that David Salem, who was a member of the Moor Lane Spanish Portuguese Synagogue for many years, now lives in Jerusalem, I certainly knew him very well, and I will be making it my business to find out more there. Moor Lane Synagogue, which is the successor to Sha'arei Tefillah on Cheetham Hill Road, has pretty much been recast as a Gibraltarian version of it, because the last of those Moor Lane Spanish Portuguese who came over from the Cheetham Hill Minyan have passed on, and there's literally almost nothing left with regards to this. Thank you very much for the comment with regards to Haim Bessel. There's a mention of a synagogue of Haim Bessel. Thank you. I am remiss for not focusing on this, and I will atone. The name Haim Bessel is immediately known to me because it features, if nothing else, featured in the glass-stained windows at Emmanuel Raffles' house as one of the most active early Sephardim at that time. And so I thank you, whoever made that comment, and I will look into it. Please move on to the next slide. Rabbi Ades was rabbi at Sha'arei Tzedek. Okay, that ties something up for me. You have to forgive me one thing, for one reason only, and that I was born and bred and raised in North Manchester. So South Manchester, we used to joke, we used to say, you needed a passport to get to South Manchester from North Manchester. And one of the great benefits was that the weather improved immediately. So please forgive me. I am not trying to be ignorant, but I am trying to learn and take on board what may be obvious to many of the attenders of this evening's lecture. I'm dedicating what research I have done this evening to the memory of Werner Meyer, who was the first person to introduce me to Moor Lane Synagogue. I was very curious as a teenager. I wanted to go there and find out more, and he welcomed me in there. He was of German extraction, but his wife was Spanish Portuguese extraction. And he made a great impression on me. I will never forget the moment as I walked in. He drew himself to full height, and he said to me, "In this synagogue, even God wears a top hat." That's the first time I heard of top hats, because the Moroccans, of course, never wore them. North Africans would never see one on their head. However, when I later moved to London and I led the Montefiore Semiha program, every occasion that I attended Lauderdale Road or Bevis Marks, it was mandatory for any rabbi to wear a top hat throughout the service. So there we are. Mr. Alien, Stuart Alien's father, I forget his first name, also was one of the very, very last. He was the last of those who were fully identifiable with the Cheetham Hill Road congregation. He was very proud of his family, the Elion family, descended from also a rabbinic family, Chacham Elion. With this I will finish. He told me something very, very important, which always stays with me. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that David Alien, thank you, David Alien. He actually drove a truck for most of his life. He was a trucker, very strong man and deeply spiritual. And he told me that as a child going to school in Cheetham Hill, he would nip out during his lunch break, pre-war, this is pre-Second World War, to pray Minha at the Cheetham Hill Road Synagogue. And he remembers clearly that as prescribed by Maimonides, when it came to Nefilat Apayim, the genuflection to the ground and placing one's head straight out on the ground, full prostration, as the Muslims do, this is what they did during the penitential prayer at Minha, and they would come fully dressed with their bowler hats or whatever other hats they were wearing, and top hats for those who were officers. And nonetheless, however fancily dressed they were, they would go down and do their prostration. So I said to him, well, of course, nowadays in the Ashkenazi congregations, people just like, bow or move their backs forwards or bend forward a little bit, but there's nothing like that. Maimonides speaks of what is known in Arabic as rakat. They're full bound to the ground and so on and so forth. And I said to him, Mr. Alien, can you please tell me whatever happened? Why did this disappear? Could it be the Second World War caused such a shock that the spiritual, sort of physical show of devotion just ebbed away and disappeared? And he said, I think it was that. I can't think of any other reason. So this is literally a witness to the pre-war situation where the affectations of noble gentry did not in any way prevent the Jews at the time and the Spanish and Portuguese to maintain their most ancient of traditions in the manner of the Muslim lands from which they originally came all those centuries through. Thank you very much indeed for your patience and for your attention. And if there's any question or any other comment you'd like to make that can still be hosted, it is through the Julius family. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Rabbi Ariel. That was an amazing trip down memory lane, and we had a bit of food and we had a bit of music. And I think you underestimated the amount of research that you did do. Obviously, there were a few little things that might be improved. Apparently, you had the wrong picture of Rabbi Gagin. You had his father, not him.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
I think we are extremely fortunate to have with us some real experts here. We did have Lydia Collins. I hope she's still here. And perhaps she'd like to say something, especially about the Rabbi Yeshayahu Atiyah, who
Yes, please.
has written about that. Perhaps we can have Lydia on.
I'm just finding Lydia.
Yeah.
Lydia, would you like to unmute and put your camera on, please?
If you can.
Hello. I enjoyed your talk very, very much. You said you hadn't seen my book, and I think perhaps that was an advantage because it meant it was a totally different viewpoint. You weren't influenced by anything I might have written, which I personally found very interesting. About Rabbi Atiyah, it was a very strange story, and Rabbi Abram Levy has told you basically what I wrote. I wrote an article in the Sephardi Bulletin because I discovered his fate after my book had been published, and I felt it was so interesting it ought to be in the public domain somewhere. And it is correct that he met this English lady returning to England from the Lebanon, and he had embarked, yes, it was the Lebanon, and they sailed together back to England on the same ship. I mean, she met him on board quite by chance. And yes, the story is true that she relayed, because there was an inquiry when the ship arrived at Liverpool why this passenger had disappeared. So if it's of any interest to you, I can send you the pages from the book where she describes her meeting with him and what happened on the voyage.
I'd be very grateful. Thank you so much for that. I am humbled
His sound is gone.
by the fact that you found the app, because when I could not get hold of so many avenues, I was about to give up. I can't tell you how close I was to writing last week to Lynn to say, please, you're going to have to call this off. But I said, no, hold on. If I discover other things and not necessarily the usual.
Sorry, Rabbi Ariel, when you I think your signal is a little bit iffy. What did you just say? Yeah.
And thank you for receiving that from. You said you'd be able to send to me.
So if anyone would like a copy of your presentation, do we have your permission to email it? Yes.
Absolutely.
So all you need to do, if anyone's interested, email info@harif.org, and we would be very happy to email you Rabbi Ariel's presentation. Yes, and I would like to ask John Cowell, who I know is on the call, and he has done research into Jews living outside Manchester, I think in places like Southport. Isn't that so? Can you say a few words about your research?
Yes, it appears in a book I produced right at the end of 2019 on the Southport Jewish community. And it is just a history of the Southport Jewish community, probably the only book ever published with the word Bruigus in the title, which I thought might please people. There were a lot of Sephardim at the beginning of the community back in 1893, but they diminished. So by, I think last year, the last two Sephardim died last year. So shall I leave it at that?
It's up to you. Yes, okay. Perhaps people, we're all dying to know their names.
Well, I can tell you their names. Yes, they were Victor Sereno and Richard Schwake.
Okay, and we don't know if they came from Aleppo originally, did they?
No, they were both born in England.
Yes, yes.
Well, can I just say a word? Although I live and work in Liverpool, I spent this afternoon in Duke Street Cemetery, which John will know all about because that is where that section is. I carried out what will go down in the history books perhaps as the first ever recorded Noahide funeral. In other words, here I was as a rabbi conducting a funeral according to the relevant tradition for a Gentile, for someone who's not Jewish. And while I was there, I made my inquiries and they said, yes, it's tucked right back there. I didn't go over, but next time I come to Southport, if I may, John, meet up with you and go there because apart from the amount of research left for me to do, which is so unending on Greater Manchester's jury, Sephardic jury, I would definitely like to do specific research further into the early Jews of Southport.
Good. I will help. I will help you with pleasure.
Thank you.
Don't mind, Rabbi Ariel. Can I call on Basil Judah? Perhaps he has a few.
Basil is no longer on the call.
Oh, he's no longer there. Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Okay, but Rabbi Ariel, if you'd like to look through the chat and see if there are any questions you can answer or would like to answer.
Yes, so let me have a look to see. While I have a quick look, I just want to make mention that in Southport, interestingly, which is, of course, certainly an extension of the Manchester community to start with, there was a Mokata who turned up, I think, in the early 1800s anyway, and he turned up from London and he converted to Peru. That was one of the early Sephardim, but he didn't remain Jewish community. Just having a quick look at one or two of these things here on the chat. Do we know anything about contacts between Aleppo Jews of Manchester and Christian and Muslims from Syria, who were also in the textile business there?
Can I just stop you?
Well, this is something I'm going to have to look into.
Just a second. We know Basil is there somewhere. Can you raise your hand and then, sorry, do answer that question and then we'll go to Basil if we can find him.
Electronically in the participants so we can see you, because there's no one down the name of Basil Judah or Judah.
Laura, I think it is. Yeah.
Laura Judah.
Yeah.
Right, okay, fine.
Just having a quick look here. Yeah, there's my mother has written in from Jerusalem to ask if it's Malak, the name he says. There's also a Ladino name for the same script, Asalhato, as well. There's Danny Wolfson has written here to say, my grandfather in Aleppo started a branch in Manchester, was in a partnership with another Jew and a Muslim. Gozim, Shayo, and Shama was the firm's name. That is really fascinating, and I would like to look into the interfaith, but different faiths and backgrounds, partnerships that were set up as well. This will be a very interesting lead to take. Share Haim in Manchester, Queen's Road, sing Hashtivenu, closer to Buenos Aires than London. How fascinating is that? Yeah, that really is very interesting. And I was told specifically it was directly imported from Manchester, so it may have come even from Queen's Road, if not from Cheetham Hill as well.
Just interrupt you
I
there,
think that's
Rabbi Ariel, and just go over to Basil, who's got his hand up physically, if not electronically.
Yeah, a few points. You mentioned the Besso Synagogue and Haim Besso. They were not Spanish and Portuguese Jews. They were, like me, of Romaniati descent. That's the first thing. Second of all, you've made no mention at all of the West Disby New Synagogue, the short-lived synagogue from 1919 to 1927, which was a synagogue that attracted Rabbi Gagin from Cairo to Manchester, and then he moved on from there down to Ramsgate after that. The West Disby New Synagogue attracted people of the Syrian community in the main, who were dissatisfied with the ritual of the Spanish and Portuguese congregation in the 1915, 1920s. This synagogue, there are some records that survived, the marriage register survived, and the core members from this particular synagogue became the founders of the Lansdowne Road Synagogue. And that's an important element. And it was that synagogue that maintained a lot of the traditions that related to Syrian congregations that had come over a long time before. So I think when you carry out further research, and all my papers are deposited with the Manchester Jewish Museum, you will find material relating to the West Disby New Synagogue. And looking through the marriage register of the West Disby New Synagogue, whose building still survives, you will find the marriage registers find about 8 or 9 named marriages where husband and wife of the same surname. So that tells you quite a lot about culture. Can I also add that there was a Beda who lived in Lansdowne Road or Clyde Road for a good many years. He must have been a descendant or member of the Beda family, but not Hacham Beda. That's it.
I'm very grateful to you, Basil, and I look forward to your mentoring and tutelage of me.
I think we've got Joe Samuels who wants to ask a question.
Slides, people. Okay.
Just coming to you, Joe.
Joe, can you unmute yourself, please?
No.
It's you're under JO, aren't you, Joe?
No. Can't hear you. Oh dear. And there's someone else with his hand up there. Richard S. Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah.
got unmuted. Thank you, Rabbi, for your extensive lecture. I'm sorry I came late. I wasn't there at the beginning of what your talk, and I wanted to know if you talked about the Jews from Iraq that lived in Manchester. There are some of them, they really develop extensive business in textiles and export. And I remember my father used to, in Baghdad, used to import some of the cloth that they manufactured in Manchester. So could you, I don't know if you talked about them, and if you have a minute, just to talk about those Jews from Iraq.
So I hadn't researched the Iraqi Jews in particular. Mainly, I found a great deal of information that was available on the Syrian traders and Jews who came over in particular, and that's why I took that as a case example. However, I would like to look into that as well, and I was perfectly aware that it was there. Of course, they're from Turkey as well as from Iraq, not just from Syria. And therefore, I would, if you are happy to do so, if you have any leads on information, sources of information for that, I'd be very grateful. But I am unable to give any exposition on that. I'm sorry, I'm unable to do so.
Yeah, and of course, there are quite a few Jews who ended up in Egypt from Manchester, like, for instance, the Smuha family. And I know Richard was on the call. I don't know if he's still there.
Yes.
You've got Richard Sassoon wants to speak now.
Yeah, that's right. And David Pepe says that you didn't mention Shared Tzedek.
I am sorry, I thought I had, but I apologize if I have not. Of course, you're talking about Shared Tzedek, which alongside Queen's Road at other ends of Palatine Road are the two main synagogues. Now they're combined now, aren't they? Shared Hayim, is that right? Yes, of course, indeed. Yes, again, my apologies if I did not at all extend on that. My research is just beginning, and that is why what I presented, I had to limit it to that as a case study that it was. But I am very grateful to have all this put my way, because when I go to the Manchester Jewish Museum and look at the archives that Basil has already mentioned to me to look through, well, that will be the end of my free time.
Okay, Richard Sassoon, is it?
Yes.
Yes, I was actually going to ask the same question as the previous person, as a descendant of Iraqi Jews myself.
Right.
What you knew about the Iraqi Jews of Manchester. I had an aunt and uncle who lived in Didsbury, Isaac and Molly Shasha. I believe that he was the Parnas Presidente of Queen's Road for some time. But also, in particular, I seem to recall my father telling me the story about I think it was the Iraqi Jews of Manchester petitioning the Home Office, or whatever the predecessor of the Home Office was, sometime around the First World War, for permission to remain and to become British citizens. And I don't know if anyone knows that story, because I think there was a picture, he showed me a picture of them. I think my great-grandfather was in the picture, and they basically wrote this open letter to the Home Office proclaiming loyalty to the King and asking to become citizens. I don't know if any, I think Lydia might know a little bit more about that than me. I don't know if you've heard that one.
Well,
No, I hadn't. Lydia, can you enlarge on this at all?
Lydia, can you unmute? Yes, while Lawrence is unmuting Lydia, I just wanted to add that Robert Sheldon was, of course, the MP. He was from an Iraqi family. I think the original name was Shamash, and he represented a constituency in Manchester, if my information is correct. I stand corrected if not.
Yes, about the petition, what it was, they felt that they had no sympathy with the Ottomans and they didn't like being classed as enemy aliens. So they asked for exemption from the Enemy Aliens Restrictions Act, which didn't allow them to travel more than 5 miles from their homes, which was, of course, not helping them with their business dealings. So they got up this petition, and after, I think it was after Britain took Baghdad in 1917, they were granted exemption from the restrictions of the Enemy Aliens Act, which meant that they were free to go about their lives without having to report to the police all the time.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for that.
Right, if anyone else wants copies of the slides,
Lynn, I must apologise. Lynn,
What?
I must apologise, but I will have to leave to go to another meeting now.
Oh, no, I think we're coming to a close now. It's been a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for all the work you've done. We found it most enjoyable. And I'm very excited that this might lead to a book or something.
Yes,
or
well,
future presentations.
yes. In fact, Lydia's just asked a question. You know, can you say a little bit more about my idea about this leading to a local history unit? I mean, if we take 1843 as a ballpark date for the first appearance of a Sephardic Syrian Jew in town in Manchester, well, who knows? We're coming up to maybe if we work for 2023 as a target date to celebrate 180 years of Sephardic presence in Manchester or something. But the point being that I would like to create a sort of to begin with an informal network of people who have been on this evening to write to me, rabbiable@gmail.com, and to see, with the guidance of Lydia, Basil, and others, how we can do this, how we can actually create a pathway. Because the Sephardic history, whether it's North African in the north of Manchester or Egyptian, Syrian, Turkish, Iraqi in the south, and Persian, by the way, we didn't mention them, and nobody even sought to mention that, but they're a very important part of the later comers to South Manchester in particular, really could do with prominence as the part of as the crucial part of the community that it has been. And the last thing I will say is I will give an apology to everybody who expected perhaps to hear more about South Manchester Jewry. It's the one crippling factor of being a North Manchester Jew. I will put right. I will say that in Liverpool also there were Egyptian Jews who gained prominence, as well as descendants from Italian Jews who are buried in the Princess Road Cemetery and the Dean Road Cemetery as well. And an apology also to Basil for having mentioned Haim Besso as being a Sephardi and not a Romagnot, which I'm very sensitive to, very, very upset with myself about, because I wrote a full page on not Ashkenazi, not Sephardi, but Romagnot in the Jewish Chronicle about 10, 12 years ago. So apologies to you there, but thank you so much for the opportunity tonight, and I will be in touch further.
Well, watch this space, I think. Thank you once again, Rabbi. I know you have to go. Just before we go, I just wanted to give Sephardi Voices a plug. They just asked if anyone has an interesting story, anyone born in an Arab country who's moved to Manchester, or any other interesting story, please do contact them. And you can do that. You can either contact me at info@harif.org, or you can go to their website, which is sephardivoices.org.uk. And I see one hand up there. Lawrence, do you want to have the last word? Lawrence Joffe? Our Lawrence is just finding you. Just to say.
I'm waiting for unmute. I've asked him to unmute.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Hi, thank you, Lynn, and thanks, Lawrence. Thanks very much for the talk, Rabbi. My question was really about the lingua franca used by the early arrivals from Aleppo. Did they already know a bit of English, or did they amongst fellow Ashkenazi Jews? Did they converse in Hebrew or was French language? Just a little idea about how much English they knew.
Rabbi's gone. Perhaps Lydia Collins would know the answer
Yes.
to that.
Has she gone too? Oh my goodness.
Oh, I
Yeah,
think
she
she's
has,
still
Oh,
there.
she's there. Okay.
Lydia?
Well, for the Arabic speakers, those that couldn't speak any English when they arrived, I understand were taken straight to the Café Royal, where they would find people to talk to them in Arabic. And they must have been employed in some sort of junior capacity, because I imagine the bigger merchants would have had some kind of foreign languages. Most of them would probably have spoken French or maybe a bit of English, who knows. But if you couldn't speak a word, I think you were, you know, people used to look out for ships arriving, food come from the Middle East, Near East, and they would take them to the Café Royal, where they could sort of, I presume, be found somewhere to live and make some useful contacts.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lydia.
If anyone wants the slides, we've had a couple of requests. I've just put my email in the chat. If you email me, I will send you a copy.
Yeah. Okay, so I think after that most enjoyable presentation, I'd just like to thank Lawrence here for operating the slides and keeping everything going. And thank you all for coming. And just to say that we have quite a big program coming up. On the 14th of September, we have a very important international panel discussion on heritage, Jewish heritage, and how can Middle Eastern Jews reclaim our heritage when it is being claimed by Arab states as their heritage. And we shall have a very important panel there to discuss this subject. And I won't go through everything else we've got lined up for you, but please do visit the website, and hoping to see you very shortly. And thank you once again for joining us.
Okay, what I'll do is what we always do, the people at the end, I will allow everyone to unmute themselves if they want.
It's the moment you've been waiting for, and you can say hello, goodbye, or whatever.
And I'm going to stop recording, so...
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
That was
very
great.
much, and
Thank you
looking
very
forward
much.
to the next one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Always.
you.
Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you. Always so educational, so enlightening. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.